Has Twitter dropped the ball when it comes to online child safety?
And what's the latest deal on NBN pricing? Hey there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Alex Kidman. Unlike the spreadsheet here that says I'm joined by Adam Turner, I really should have fixed
I
that.
tried to clone you, but I was hoping you wouldn't notice.
Anyway, Alex, assuming you are Alex, it was heavily rumored this week that Apple would release a new iPad. Instead, we got the new Apple Pencil. Should fans be excited about an Apple Pencil, new Apple Pencil?
Look, even if you're the kind of person who's going to be excited by an Apple Pencil, you shouldn't be excited by this Apple Pencil. It's such a weird thing. USB-C, slightly cheaper than the old Apple Pencil, which should be a good thing, but it doesn't work with the cheapest iPad they sell. It doesn't have pressure sensitivity. It's shorter than other Apple Pencils. It's genuinely the first Apple product, probably since like the G4 Cube, where I've looked at it and gone, who's going to buy this? Who is this for?
Well, this week we're joined by a man who loves a good writing implement. It's the Register's Simon Sharwood. Simon, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Adam.
What would it take to get you excited about an Apple Pencil?
Look, I'm actually interested that Apple has found something else that USB-C is good for after years of being a bit of a holdout. And in fact, I've got half a story about that pencil on screen now, so I'll shamelessly pinch some of Alex's observations about it. Alex, you are my writing implement.
I thought you wanted something sharp.
Right. I quit. I'm out of here. I'm gone.
I think I'm part of that cohort that just I had rubbish handwriting to begin with, and the less I do it these days, who needs handwriting these days? You can do everything on your phone or on a computer. So my handwriting is now scarcely functional.
Well, Simon's here this week not for his calligraphy, but because the artist formerly known as Twitter was fined $610,000 by Australia's eSafety Commission for failing to comply with child abuse handling reports regulations. We'll dive into that soon, but first, the NBN has finally struck a long-awaited new pricing deal. Alex, what's the story here?
So we return once more, dear listeners, to our soup du jour. It's been a while. The NBN has a new SAU, a special access undertaking, and this is the regulatory instrument that sets the pricing that NBN Co., that's the company that built the network and runs the network, not your telco, can charge your telco and then charge you. And there are a few big headline pieces to this, but my goodness, it's taken us a long time to get here because NBN Co. suggested an SAU a year or so ago. That one got knocked back. There was another one. That one got revised. It got revised again. And we've finally reached a point where it almost feels like everyone's kind of thrown their hands up in the air and gone, look, we're just really sick of dealing with this. How about this? And even the ACCC's kind of gone, yeah, okay.
So, as an end punter, what's it mean for me? Am I going to save some money on my bill?
Possibly. So a big part of this has to do with the pricing that NBN Co can charge your telco. It is up to your telco to decide what it wants to charge you, how much of a margin it wants on those services. But there are a few big headline things that suggest it probably will. One of the biggest is the removal of CVC, the connectivity virtual circuit charging for NBN services of 100 meg and above from December the 1st this year, and then from every other plan from mid 2026. And this was one of those things that Australian ISPs have just forever said, this is bad business. We can't make money this way. It means it's too expensive to run these services. In theory, with it removed, we might see cheaper plans.
Simon, did we think we'd see this day where they killed off the CVC? How much of a difference do you think it'll make?
Look, I think for years that ISPs and carriers have been complaining that they just can't make a quid reselling NBN services. And of course, NBN services are the only game in town. So I think this is the culmination of years of effort to get NBN Co to change its spots. I don't know exactly what it'll mean in terms of your hip pocket, but I do know that this just puts the NBN on a slightly better and more certain footing in which all stakeholders can make some money. And that's good news because it means that we'll get some market diversity instead of only the bigger carriers, the bigger ISPs, feeling that they can make a dollar out of it.
Is one of the challenges here, will NBN make less money out of it? Is one of the reasons why they wanted to keep CVCs so the NBN could be more profitable with this dream that maybe one day they'd flog it off to someone?
Look, I think so, yes, but I'm sure that the accountants and the actuaries have had a look at this and considered what it means for NBN Co's future. Business officers have a duty not to self harm. I can't imagine that they would have done this knowing that it put NBN Co, the business, on a worse footing.
And I mean, one of the other interesting pieces here, and it'll be really interesting to see how the ISPs sell this one, is what they're calling a new basic voice and data service. And they're saying, as per the ACCC, they're saying that it'll be offered at about half the price of NBN Co's existing entry level broadband offer. Now, entry level at this point means 12.1. That's not very fast at all. But if you're talking your rarely online consumer who perhaps more just wants a phone line and maybe to check the weather, once a week or something, it's more than enough. And that being cheaper could have a big impact for people, in the most financially constrained circumstances.
I don't think that sort of a plan is necessarily aimed at a kind of low bandwidth consumer. I think that sort of plan becomes useful for Internet of Things applications.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
NBN Co knows that it's in competition with 5G for connecting devices. And there are going to be millions, if not billions, of devices connect to networks in Australia over the coming decades. A basic plan gets NBN into the game there.
Unless those devices are becoming sentient, though, they're probably not going to need the voice part of that package.
Voice is one of those services that's just bundled into the network,
True.
and it's hard to decouple. So the fact that it's a voice and data service is nice, and absolutely. Will there be some users who just want that really basic service, or want that really basic service at the holiday house they own and are cruelly denying the community access to affordable housing? So there will be demand for it, but I suspect some of the demand will be for machines, not for humans.
We've been arguing about the NBN for so long and trying to sort out so many details. Is this the last big thing on the to-do list that needs to be sorted out? What else is there?
I'm not aware of anything else. Look, there are certainly still network upgrades that are kind of built into the assumptions about what NBN Co will do in the future. So last time I checked, DOCSIS 3 wasn't fully deployed, maybe not even deployed at all, and DOCSIS 4 is on the horizon, and that impacts people who are connected to the cable network. There are still progressive fibre upgrades going to some parts of the network. 5G is a big challenge to NBN Co, and we're yet to see how it handles that. And then, of course, there is the small matter of the tens of billions of dollars of debt that NBN Co carries and what's going to happen to that in the future. So, I think the NBN story has many more chapters left to be written, but this is a really important ending to a chapter in terms of just keeping its costs down and making it getting rid of something that its key stakeholders hate.
Enjoying the show? That's great. Don't forget to subscribe, which you can do on every podcast platform you've ever heard of. Just search for Vertical Hold or go to our website, verticalhold.com.au, where we've got handy buttons for every single podcast platform. So it's been pretty clear since Elon Musk took over Twitter that it hasn't had a lot of oversight. I mean, it pretty much fired its entire safety team and reporting team, and that was always going to lead to trouble. And it's in trouble. The service formerly known as Twitter, it's now X. I keep forgetting that, and I think I'll keep forgetting that for as long as we run this segment. Simon, how has X run afoul of the e-safety commission, and why is it so expensive to do so?
The eSafety Commissioner can compel platforms to report on whether or not they meet a thing called Australia's basic online safety expectations. Now, the eSafety Commissioner's role in life is to help keep Australians safe online. And when it sends out a notice asking if you comply with the online safety expectations, basically you're being told to say, okay, prove how you keep the very worst stuff, including child sexual abuse material, off your service. Now, the Commissioner has done 2 rounds of please explains about this to the big platforms. And earlier this week, it announced the results of the second round of please explains. And they went to Twitter, Google, Discord, Twitch, and TikTok. And Google said to the commissioner, "Look, we can't get you all the info you want in the time you want." But it also gave the commissioner some kind of weird and unhelpful answers, and so they got a slap on the wrist. Twitter ignored a bunch of stuff and was unresponsive. Now, this isn't surprising because, as Alex said, it's fired most of its safety team. And I don't know if listeners know, it's also completely stopped being responsive to the press. For a while, if you sent the Twitter press team an inquiry, it would auto-reply sending you a poop emoji, which I think is, admirably mature and also eloquent about how mature Elon Musk might really be. So basically, the e-safety commissioner early this week said, well, we didn't get much from Twitter. It didn't take it seriously. It cut and pasted some nonsense answers. And we don't think that's good enough. And it's hard to disagree because child sex abuse material is utterly vile. It's a revolting crime to create or distribute it. So the commissioner published its findings from its latest round of please explain notices and said Twitter was so egregiously bad at responding that it's warned it's going to fine them about $610,000. Twitter's been given 28 days to get its act together and to respond. I've seen no indication that it intends to or that it intends to engage with the commissioner at all.
So the e-safety commission is unlikely to be swayed by a poop emoji. That's what you're saying.
Well, I'll leave that to listeners to decide. But I think e-safety is staffed by serious people who understand their responsibilities, and I'm pretty sure there's no legislation that says poop emoji is a reasonable response to being compelled to provide information by the government. I could be wrong. I'm old. Younger listeners, tell us if I'm wrong. Is it, I don't know. Can you send a poop emoji for your homework these days?
So, Simon, if they've got 28 days to do the please explain, does that mean if they suddenly came through with here's everything and how we do it, they'd avoid the fine, or is Elon
Yeah,
now
they
going to be
probably
right?
would.
Okay,
They probably would. But, one of the things we've seen from Elon Musk over the last few months is he just doesn't pay his bills. So, they've quit offices in the US, they've quit data centers, they've fired staff without paying them their severance. There's every chance that he could just thumb his nose. It's entirely possible, I think, that an extreme consequence of this could just be X/Twitter quitting Australia. They reportedly don't have much of a sales operation left here. They could just say, we're not going to pay. There's no entity here to sue. Come for us in the US. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could happen. I think it's reasonably likely that Musk would be defiant if levied with this fine.
So what kind of clout has the e-safety commission got? Can they have Twitter blocked in Australia? Can they have them removed from the app stores?
I'm not certain exactly what they can do, but they can certainly kick up a stink. And I think there are escalation procedures that are available to the commissioner that could end up with
Yeah.
blocking. I think what we've really got here is just another example of Twitter no longer being a welcoming community or a worthy member of the wider internet community. I spent 15 years building up a community on Twitter that meant a lot to me personally and professionally. And I've largely walked away from that over the last 90 days and actually kind of really scaled down all of my social media activity and am quite enjoying the change in my life. I suspect that the more Twitter demonstrates that it's just not responsibly run, um, the fewer people will bother with it.
One of the other things I was reading your piece on this that I found really interesting, some of the detail that they dive into was the question of covering e-safety material in different languages. From what you've written, Google's something like 70 odd, as is TikTok. Twitch is down to around 24. Twitter/X is like 12. That leaves a lot of language, a lot of scope for serious harm, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and one of the observations the commissioner made was that this is a really big issue for multicultural Australia. We have so many languages spoken in Australia that even though Twitter makes some effort to weed out revolting material or illegal material, there could be plenty of it getting through to vulnerable communities or to smaller language communities. And again, it's just an example of Twitter perhaps not being super responsible. Now, having said that, Twitter is not alone in not having adequate language coverage. I think it was the New York Times that exposed how Facebook just didn't have moderation in parts of South Asia where Facebook had extraordinary adoption and extraordinary presence, and in which a genocide was basically being encouraged and coordinated on Facebook, but it had no mods who spoke the language, or nowhere near enough mods who spoke the language in order to kick that material off the platform. So, language coverage, it's a big and important issue.
So, have we seen anyone who's doing this well?
It's really hard to know. The platforms all publish data saying that they've taken down lots and lots of abhorrent or illegal material, but you never know what or how much of it they might not be catching.
Yeah.
And something Twitter's just announced today is a scheme to get all new users to pay $1 to sign up in the hope of
Making some actual
stopping
money.
spam bots. No, just to stop spam bots. Just to stop spam bots. And the fact remains that on all the platforms, you can create an account for free without verification. You can share anything on that account, and the account can be gone an hour later. There are so many ways to share material online and on these platforms, and they don't tell us really what their capabilities are in terms of how fast they'll catch it without a report. So the suspicion is that almost every platform is being used to distribute nasty, illegal content, and the extent of that just isn't known. Now, the smart isn't the word. Um, Careful people who trade in this revolting stuff do have better operational security skills, OPSEC skills, and will try and do it on more obscure parts of the internet. But it's so easy to create accounts that just flicker in and out of existence. Um, it's hard for platforms to police every use.
It is still important, though, that they try. I mean, I don't want us to come across as saying, "Look, this problem's too hard to solve or too hard to tackle." I think every instance of this material removed from the online sphere is a win in itself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is why Australia, in a way, is quite fortunate to have eSafety. It's an unusual agency in a global context. But yeah, look, any time this material is detected, it's a win because it destroys lives. This
Hmm.
stuff.
So, if we made you social media El Presidente for the day, how would you approach it?
I would go back in time. I would go back in time by about 25 years and make sure that these platforms were properly regulated before they got big. I'd go back to when they had about 1 million users and I'd pause their sign-ups and I would rebuild the internet, essentially. Um, so that criminal material and misinformation is something that these platforms take seriously from far, far earlier in their lives. And part of that would be getting a bunch of venture capitalists into a room and shouting at them a lot to be more responsible instead of putting return on investment first.
Hey, Alex, just before we wrap up with Simon, I heard there's a new Nintendo console, but it's not from Nintendo and it's old, but it's new. What's the story here?
Okay, so this is a company called Analog, and Analog have been making these reproduction consoles, but that doesn't quite explain what it is that they do. They're very high end for collectors and enthusiasts. And where, Adam, I know you're, for example, familiar with emulation, where you have software
Yeah.
that pretends it's a Super Nintendo or a Mega Drive or
Yeah.
whatever. This isn't emulation. They actually use circuitry and hardware, a field programmable gate array, if you like, the technical terms, to accurately recreate the hardware in old systems. So to date, Analog's done versions of the NES, of the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. They have a thing called the Analog Pocket, which is a Game Boy on steroids, basically. It'll do a bunch of other systems. And they've just announced a thing called the Analog 3D, which is their take on the classic Nintendo 64.
So, hang on. Before we dive into that, how are they allowed to do that?
Because basically they're not infringing on copyrights, they're not infringing on specific code. Everything has been clean roomed engineered in the same way. Broadly speaking, and this is not explicit legal advice because I'm as much of a lawyer as Lionel Hutz is, emulators in Australia, the code in most emulators is legal. Using the ROMs, the copyrighted code, the games themselves, and some of the BIOS files is not.
Yes.
But the actual reverse engineering of this stuff has been done, to a microscopic level, literally. And actually, Analog has been one of the better players in this in terms of overall accuracy. One of the big issues with emulation is for kind of 80-90% of games, it's fine. It works beautifully. And then you have those games where actually the emulated code does not pretend to be the original hardware quite well enough.
Yeah.
And this is something that Analog has done fairly well, but they're setting themselves a pretty high target with this thing. One of the big challenges, anyone who's ever played an N64 will remember it had that whole fog thing, and it was 3D, but it was a little bit kind of edgy. Things had kind of blurry but sharp corners. It's kind of weird. They're stating that the Analog 3D will not only be HDMI compliant, because that's just table stakes for a new console these days, it'll actually do 4K. 4K N64 without looking like a garbled mess. That's a big job. That's hard.
So, do they do this through upscaling or redesigning the games, or what do we expect in terms of quality here?
So upscaling largely. They're not so much redesigning the games, although they will have to do a certain degree of clever programming to get around some of the weird variances that the N64 especially had. So again, anyone who owned an N64 back in the day, or like myself, I still do because I'm a tragic that way, will remember that after a while they released an expansion pack, came with Donkey Kong 64, worked with Perfect Dark and a few other games, but basically a little memory booster thing. And it didn't affect most games, but there's just a handful. Space Station Silicon Valley is the one that comes to mind, where actually, if you had that expansion pack in, it crashed the game really early
Oof.
on. And the solution back in the day was right, well, yank the expansion pack out, play the game, all is good. You can't exactly do that if the expansion pack is actually hardwired into the silicon. So I don't know how they're going to get around that. But by and large, it's to do with providing an output and scaling that output up. People have been doing this for a long, long time, actually, with N64 code. When Nintendo put out their Mario All Stars game for the Switch a couple of years ago, there's a version of Mario 64, the N64 Mario game on there. And they're upscaling, Nintendo's own upscaling for that, because that's got to go through HDMI, that's got to go to a modern TV, was not quite as good as what the open community was doing at the time. So there is scope for things to look a little better, but it certainly takes some fairly serious work, as well as this being analog, A, a lot of patience, and B, a willingness to spend a fair amount of money.
So why would somebody want one of these? I would think if you're a diehard, you want the original hardware. If you don't care, then you'd get something else. Where is the sweet spot for a device like this?
So the sweet spot for a device like this is you've got to be very keen. You've got to be a bit of a diehard as it is, because all of analog systems are expensive. In Australian dollar terms, while they haven't announced pricing for this particular model, we are talking north of $300 easy.
Yeah.
Plus shipping, and they tend to do ferociously expensive shipping. It's FedEx highest level. You order the thing from Texas, it turns up in like 3 days or something. It's insane, but it's the only
Delivered
level
on a
of shipping
silver
they do.
platter.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But expensive is the word here. But the issue, and this is something I face as a collector of these things, is this hardware is starting to rot. It's starting to break down. And Adam, I know you review a lot of TVs, but you'd be well aware relatively few new TVs, especially higher end ones, come with those old school composite inputs that something like the N64 used. You need something that can do HDMI. This solves both of those problems. It is also fully region free, which is an issue if you want to play, for example, Japanese cartridges, or here in Australia, we were part of the European PAL market. We can't play NTSC US cartridges without some modifications, and people do sometimes do those. So it solves a bunch of those problems in a system that should hopefully last, a lot longer than a lot of the N64s that are out there.
And are you getting one?
I am going to have to wait and see how much they charge for the thing. I'm going to have to see what my finances are like. And honestly, Analog also does not have a great track record. They're not a very big company, and they're often excused for this a lot. But they don't have a great track record in terms of their ordering systems and the speed of fulfillment. So, a friend of the show, Alex Boz, Oz Retro Gamer, has the Analog Pocket, their little Game Boy on steroids I was mentioning earlier. He is still waiting 11 months later for the add-on cartridges to let him play things like Game Gear games on them, simply because they just haven't shipped them to him. And it is just an absolute known thing that the moment they put anything up for sale, it gets flooded. It can be very hard just to order one of these things because they take a very conservative viewpoint in terms of how many they build, which I guess from a business standpoint makes sense because that way they don't go broke by ordering a billion of them, but can be really frustrating when the scalpers just hover in, hoover them all up, and you suddenly see them being offered for 3 times the price on eBay.
All right. Well, good luck.
I think I'm going to need it. Well, that just about wraps up this week's ep of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Simon for joining us.
Gee.
An erudite answer from an erudite man, and you now get the opportunity to be even more erudite. Your chance to plug whatever you like, where you work, pieces you've written recently, your favorite recipe. Go.
Well, as I said earlier, I've kind of, given Twitter a bit of a wide berth, and I'm now at @sharwood at theblower.au on Mastodon. Come join me there. And I just thought I'd let listeners know that Devo is coming to Australia in November. Solo shows in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, and festivals in those fair cities as well. Last tour for Devo. I'm so excited about that.
I'm sure you'll be whipping everyone into excitement about that.
Whipping them good.
And as always, you can catch us at the Vertical Hold webpage, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can look up Adam or myself on Mastodon or Blue Sky or Threads. Vertical Hold is still technically on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And otherwise, shout in our general direction. We might hear you.
Don't forget our national tour.
Really? Where do I get tickets?
Until then, thanks everyone for dropping by. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think about the new NBN deal. Let us know what you think about social media's efforts to crack down on child exploitation. just let us know what you think about things in general.
And I'm just going to let this plane go over. Sorry, the wind must have changed, or we're just getting a ha, you're it hour.
Oh, that one wasn't too bad.
Yeah, A320.